It was one of those nights when the sky itself seems to cry. The rain came down in thick sheets, muffling the city's usual noises and washing everything into a blur of gray. My shoes squished with every step as I tried in vain to shelter under my coat. The streets were nearly deserted, but I still had a ways to go before reaching the subway, so I waved at every passing car, hoping one would stop. And then, almost like a phantom itself, a taxi glided toward me. I hadn't even noticed it approaching until its headlights cut through the fog of rain. The cab was old, really old, like something from the 70s, the paint chipped, and the windows fogged. I hesitated, but with no other options in sight, I climbed in. The driver didn't turn to look at me. He was hunched over, his face hidden by the collar of a worn leather jacket and the brim of a hat pulled low. His hands were pale, almost unnaturally so, gripping the wheel tightly as if it was the only thing holding him to this world. Where to? His voice was gravelly, as though it hadn't been used in a while. At Elmwood Drive, near the old cemetery, I replied, trying not to shiver as the back of the cab felt unnervingly cold. He didn't respond, but the car lurched forward, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. I leaned back, trying to shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at my gut. The windows were so foggy, I could barely see outside, but from what I could make out, the streets were completely empty. It was just us, the cab, the rain, and the ghostly glow of the streetlights. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the windshield wipers. But then I noticed something strange. The route we were taking, it wasn't the fastest way to my house. In fact, we were heading in the opposite direction, toward the outskirts of town. I think you're going the wrong way, I said, my voice wavering slightly. The driver didn't respond. Hey, did you hear me? This isn't the right way. Still nothing. The unease turned to full-blown panic. I leaned forward, about to tell him to stop, when I saw it, in the rearview mirror. His eyes black, hollow pits staring at me through the glass, even though his head hadn't moved. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The air in the cab grew thick, oppressive. The temperature dropped even further, so much so that I could see my breath clouding in front of me. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. Static at first, then faint whispers, indistinct voices muttering something I couldn't make out. I reached for the door handle, my fingers shaking. I had to get out of there, now, but the handle wouldn't budge. It felt like it was frozen in place, locked by some invisible force. My pulse thundered in my ears as the cab veered off the road, tires skidding on the slick pavement. We were heading down a narrow and marked lane, the trees on either side looming like skeletal hands, branches scraping against the car as we passed. I slammed my fists against the partition, screaming at the driver to stop. I felt a presence in the back seat beside me, the sensation of someone or something breathing down my neck. Slowly, trembling, I turned my head. There was a figure shadow, barely distinguishable in the dim light, but I saw its eyes. White, hollow, terrifying, the same black voids as the driver's, and then it smiled. I screamed, my hands clawing at the door, at the windows. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape. The cab hurtled deeper into the woods, the road beneath us seeming to vanish into nothingness. The whispers became chants, louder, overlapping. He never lets them go. He never lets them go. The figure beside me leaned in, its face inches from mine. Its mouth open, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth. I shut my eyes, praying this was all some nightmare, that I would wake up in my bed, safe and sound. The car jolted to a stop. Silence, pure, suffocating silence. I opened my eyes. We were in front of a dilapidated house, its windows dark, the air around it still and lifeless. The driver turned slowly, for the first time facing me fully. His face was gone, skin stretched tight over his skull, his eyes those terrible, empty eyes locked on mine. "We're here," he rasped, his voice sending a chill down my spine. Before I could react, the door on my side swung open by itself. And that's when I saw them, figures emerging from the trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, moving toward the cab. I bolted out of the car, running as fast as I could, slipping on the wet leaves and mud. I didn't stop until I was far from the house, far from that cursed cab. When I finally looked back, the taxi was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. I don't know how I made it home that night, but I'll never forget those eyes, the eyes of something not human, something far worse. And ever since that night, whenever it rains, I hear whispers in the static of my radio. He never lets them go.